The rain came down in sheets that turned the earth to mud and misery. And through it all, Natalie Carson could barely lift her head to see the figure emerging from the storm like something out of a fever dream. She had been chained to the plow for 3 days now, her wrists raw and bleeding where the iron bit into her flesh, her body trembling with exhaustion and cold as the autumn storm swept across the Nevada plains. Her stepfather had done this, punishment for refusing to marry the banker's son, a man twice her age with hands that wandered and breath that reeked of whiskey. She had said no, and Jacob Thornton did not tolerate defiance in what he considered his household. The man who stepped into view was massive, well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the plow itself. His hair hung past his shoulders in dark waves, plastered to his face by the rain, and beneath his soaked buckskin jacket, she could see the unmistakable bulk of powerful muscles earned from years of surviving in the mountains. He carried a rifle in one hand, but as his eyes found her, chained and shivering in the mud, something shifted in his expression that made her breath catch despite her exhaustion. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, and his voice was deep, rough from disuse but edged with something she had not heard in so long she almost did not recognize it. Compassion. He dropped to his knees beside her without hesitation, his large hands reaching for the chains with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man his size. "Who did this to you?" "My stepfather," she managed through chattering teeth. "I would not marry who he chose." The stranger's jaw clenched, and she watched the muscle jump beneath his beard. He examined the lock on the chains, then stood abruptly, striding toward the barn with purpose. She heard the sound of breaking wood, and he returned moments later with a heavy iron bar. Without a word, he wedged it into the chain links and began to apply pressure. The muscles in his arms bulged beneath the wet leather of his jacket, veins standing out along his forearms as he strained against the metal. The chains snapped with a crack that echoed even through the rain. He bent and gently lifted the remaining lengths from her wrists, his calloused fingers impossibly careful as he examined the raw wounds. "Can you stand?" "I do not know," she admitted, and the shame of it burned through her even as her body refused to cooperate. She had been strong once, capable, but 3 days without food or water while chained to a plow would break anyone. The mountain man did not hesitate. He shrugged out of his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, then scooped her up as though she weighed nothing at all. She was 20 years old, a grown woman, but in his arms she felt small and protected for the first time since her mother had died 2 years ago. "Where are you taking me?" "Away from here," he said simply. "A man who would do this to his own does not deserve to keep you." "He will come after me," she warned, but even as she said it, she was not fighting him. She did not want to fight him. Anything was better than this. Let him try. There was no bravado in his words, just a statement of fact delivered in that low, steady voice. He carried her to where a massive horse stood waiting, a dappled gray stallion that stamped restlessly in the mud. With remarkable ease, he lifted her onto the saddle and swung up behind her, one powerful arm circling her waist to hold her steady against his chest. "Walk with me," he said quietly, and she felt the words rumble through his chest into her back. "You are free now." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. They rode through the rain for hours, and Natalie drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the warmth of his body behind her and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. When she finally surfaced fully, the rain had stopped and they were making camp in a small hollow sheltered by towering pines. The storm had passed over, leaving the early evening air crisp and cold with the promise of winter not far behind. The mountain man had already built a fire and was heating water in a battered tin pot. He looked up as she stirred, and she got her first real look at him in the firelight. He was perhaps 30 years old, maybe a year or two older, with strong, angular features and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, old and faded, and his nose had clearly been broken at least once. He should have been frightening, this huge, weathered stranger, but instead she found herself feeling safer than she had in years. "You need to drink," he said, and brought her the pot once the water had cooled enough. She drank greedily, and he did not rush her, just waited until she had her fill before speaking again. "My name is Nathan Turner. I have a cabin about 2 days' ride north of here, up in the Ruby Mountains. You can stay there as long as you need." "I am Natalie," she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Natalie Carson. I do not have anything to offer you in return." Nathan shook his head. "I am not asking for anything. What was done to you was wrong, and I am not the kind of man who walks past that." He moved to his saddlebags and produced some jerky and hardtack. "Eat slowly. Your stomach needs time to adjust." She took the food with trembling hands and forced herself to follow his instructions, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour it. As she ate, she watched him move around the camp, efficient and sure in every action. He checked the horse, gathered more wood for the fire, and laid out bedrolls with the practiced ease of someone who had spent more nights under the stars than under a roof. "Why were you down this way?" she asked finally. "The Ruby Mountains are a long way from Hawthorne." "Trading furs and supplies," he said. "I come down twice a year, spring and fall, to sell what I have and buy what I need for the next season. Was heading back when the storm hit." He paused, then added quietly, "I am glad it did." Something in the way he said it made warmth bloom in her chest, completely unrelated to the fire. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the flames and the distant hoot of an owl. Finally, Nathan spoke again. "Your stepfather, will he send men after you?" "Probably," Natalie admitted. "He has friends in town, and he does not like to lose what he considers his property." The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. "My mother married him when I was 16, and she died just 6 months later. I have been trapped in that house ever since." Nathan's expression darkened. "No one owns you, remember that." "Easy to say," she whispered, "harder to believe. Then I will remind you until you do." He stood and brought her one of the bedrolls. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day and you need to heal." She wanted to argue that she was fine, that she did not need coddling, but her body had other ideas. The moment she lay down, wrapped in the warm blanket with the fire crackling nearby and Nathan Turner keeping watch, exhaustion pulled her under like a riptide. She woke once in the night to find him still sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, keeping guard. When their eyes met across the flames, he nodded once, a silent reassurance, and she let herself drift back to sleep. Morning came cold and clear, the October sun painting the Nevada landscape in shades of gold and amber. Nathan had coffee brewing by the time Natalie woke, and he handed her a cup without comment. She wrapped her hands around the warm tin, savoring both the heat and the bitter taste of the drink. "How are your wrists?" he asked, and she looked down at the raw, angry circles where the chains had been. In the daylight they looked even worse, crusted with dried blood and dirt. "They hurt," she admitted, "but I will survive." Nathan pulled a small leather pouch from his saddlebag and knelt beside her. "This is going to sting, but it will help prevent infection." He opened the pouch to reveal a thick salve that smelled of herbs and something else she could not identify. When he took her hand in his to apply it, his touch was so gentle it made her throat tight. The salve did sting, but she bit her lip and did not complain as he carefully treated both wrists, then wrapped them in clean strips of cloth he cut from what looked like an old shirt. His hands were huge, scarred and calloused from hard work, but they moved with a careful precision that spoke of practice. "You have done this before," she observed. "Living alone in the mountains, you learn to doctor yourself or you die," he said simply. "Had my share of injuries over the years." "How long have you been up there?" "5 years now." He finished wrapping her second wrist and sat back on his heels. "Left civilization behind after the war. You fought." She was not surprised. He had that look about him, the bearing of a man who had seen violence and survived it. "For the Union," he confirmed. "Lost a lot of good men. When it was over, I could not go back to my old life. Everything felt too small, too suffocating after what I had seen. So I headed west and kept going until I found a place that felt right." Natalie understood that feeling more than she could express, the need to escape, to find somewhere you could breathe. "Do you ever get lonely?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely is better than feeling trapped. And the mountains have their own kind of company if you learn to listen." Then his gaze returned to her, sharp and assessing. "Can you ride today? We need to put more distance between you and Hawthorne." "I can ride," she said, and meant it. She would crawl if she had to, anything to avoid going back to that house. They broke camp quickly, Nathan moving with the efficiency of long practice while Natalie helped as much as her weakened state allowed. When he lifted her onto the horse again, she tried not to notice how her body responded to his nearness, the way her heart picked up speed when his hands circled her waist. It was gratitude, she told herself. Nothing more than gratitude and relief at being saved. But as they rode north through the high desert, his arm steady around her waist and his chest solid against her back, she knew she was lying to herself. They stopped twice that day to rest the horse and to let Natalie stretch her cramped muscles. Each time, Nathan was attentive without being overbearing, offering food and water and checking her bandages with that same careful gentleness. He did not push her to talk, but he answered her questions readily when she asked them. She learned that he had been a carpenter before the war, the son of farmers in Ohio who had built things with his hands since he was tall enough to hold a hammer. She learned that he had survived Shiloh and Gettysburg, and a dozen other battles that haunted him still in quiet moments. She learned that he had a sister back east he wrote to twice a year, and that he traded with the Shoshone who passed through the mountains, having earned their respect through fair dealing and defending one of their young men from claimed jumpers 3 years back. In turn, she told him about her mother, a gentle woman who had married Jacob Thornton out of desperation after Natalie's father died in a mine collapse. She told him about the gradual realization that her stepfather saw her as property, a burden to be disposed of through marriage to whoever would take her off his hands. She told him about the banker's son who had cornered her in the pantry and put his hands on her, and how when she reported it to Jacob, he had slapped her and told her she should be grateful for the attention. By the time she finished talking, Nathan's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his beard, but his voice when he spoke was carefully controlled. "You will never go back there, I promise you that." "You cannot make that promise," she said quietly. "I have no money, no skills beyond keeping house. Where will I go? You will figure that out," Nathan said with absolute certainty. "But you will do it as a free woman, not as someone's property." He paused, then added, "And for what it is worth, my cabin has more than enough room. You are welcome to stay through the winter while you decide what comes next." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and danger in equal measure. Spending months alone in a mountain cabin with this man, this stranger who had already proven himself more honorable in 2 days than any man she had known in years. It should have been frightening. Instead, it felt like hope. "I would like that," she said softly. "Thank you." They made camp that night near a creek, the water running cold and clear from the mountains they were steadily approaching. Nathan caught 2 trout with his bare hands, moving through the shallows with surprising grace for such a large man, and cooked them over the fire wrapped in wild onions he foraged from nearby. As they ate, Natalie found herself watching him, studying the way the firelight played across his features and highlighted the strength in his arms and shoulders. He had rolled up his sleeves to wash after cooking, and she could see the defined muscles of his forearms, the network of scars that told stories of hard living and harder choices. His hair had dried in waves that fell past his shoulders, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to run her fingers through it. The thought shocked her. It had been only 2 days since he had found her chained to that plow. 2 days since he had broken her free and carried her away from that nightmare. It was too soon to be thinking such things, too soon to be feeling the flutter in her stomach when he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. But the heart, she was learning, did not much care about what was proper or appropriate. "You are staring," Nathan said without looking up from his food, but there was the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Sorry," she said quickly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I was just thinking that I do not know anything about you beyond what you have told me, what kind of man you really are." Now he did look up, and his gaze was steady and serious. "The kind who keeps his word, the kind who believes a man's worth is in his actions, not his words. The kind who thinks anyone who would chain another human being to a plow deserves a bullet, but who is trying hard not to be the kind who delivers it." He paused. "Is that what you wanted to know?" "Yes," she whispered. "That is exactly what I wanted to know." They finished eating in comfortable silence, and when Nathan offered her the last of the coffee, their fingers brushed as she took the cup. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with the cold night air. That night, as she lay wrapped in her bedroll with Nathan keeping watch once again, Natalie allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stay in those mountains, to build a life in that cabin with this quiet, honorable man who had saved her, without asking for anything in return. It was a dangerous fantasy, she knew, because she had learned the hard way that dreams could turn to nightmares in the span of a heartbeat. But for the first time in 2 years, she let herself hope anyway. The 3rd day of riding brought them into the foothills of the Ruby Mountains, and Natalie could feel the change in elevation in the crisp, thin air, and the increasing presence of pine and aspen around them. Nathan's posture had relaxed incrementally, though he still kept alert for any signs of pursuit. So far, they had seen no one, which either meant Jacob Thornton had decided to cut his losses or that he was biding his time. Natalie suspected the latter. How much farther? She asked as they paused to let the horse drink from a mountain stream. "We will reach the cabin before dark," Nathan said. "It is in a valley between 2 peaks, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms but high enough that most people do not bother coming up this far." Most people. Trappers pass through occasionally, and the Shoshone have a winter camp about a day's ride east. But for the most part, it is just me and the wildlife. He glanced at her. "It can be hard for people who are used to towns and company. The silence takes getting used to." "I think I will manage," Natalie said dryly. "Silence sounds wonderful after the past 2 years." They rode on, climbing steadily as the afternoon wore on. The landscape was breathtaking. All soaring peaks and deep valleys thick with evergreens, the air scented with pine and earth, and the promise of coming snow. Natalie found herself relaxing in increments, the tension she had carried for so long slowly unwinding as the miles stretched between her and Hawthorne. When they finally crested a ridge, and Nathan pointed down into a sheltered valley, she caught her breath. The cabin sat in a small clearing beside a pristine lake, its reflection mirrored in the still water. It was larger than she had expected, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. There was a small barn for the horse, a smokehouse, and what looked like a well-tended garden plot, now empty for the winter. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already dusted with early snow, creating a natural fortress that felt both isolated and protected. "It is beautiful," she breathed. Nathan smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Welcome home," he said, and then seemed to catch himself. "I mean welcome, for as long as you want to stay." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent behind the western peaks. Nathan helped her dismount, and Natalie stood on her own feet for the first time in 3 days, swaying slightly as her legs adjusted to supporting her weight again. His hand was immediately at her elbow, steadying her, and she was grateful for it. "Take your time," he said quietly. "Your body has been through a lot." He led her to the cabin and opened the door, gesturing for her to enter first. Inside, it was clean and well organized, far more so than she had expected from a man living alone. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books, and a bed built into one corner. A ladder led to a loft above, and through an open door she could see what looked like a separate room for storage. "You take the bed," Nathan said, already moving to build a fire in the hearth. "I will sleep in the loft." "I cannot take your bed," Natalie protested. "You have already done so much." "You are injured and recovering," he said firmly. "The loft is plenty comfortable for me." This is not a discussion. She wanted to argue, but the truth was that her body was screaming for rest, and the bed looked impossibly inviting with its thick quilts and soft furs. "Thank you," she said instead, "for everything." Nathan nodded and turned his attention to the fire. Within minutes, he had flames crackling in the hearth, spreading warmth through the cabin. He moved around the space with easy familiarity, lighting oil lamps and hauling water from the well outside. Natalie sank into one of the chairs at the table, content to watch him work and marvel at how quickly her life had changed. 3 days ago, she had been chained to a plow in the rain, convinced she would die in that field. Now she was in a mountain cabin with a man who had saved her without hesitation, who treated her with a respect and gentleness she had almost forgotten existed. It felt like a dream, and she kept waiting for the moment when she would wake up back in that cold, hateful house in Hawthorne. "You are safe here," Nathan said, as though reading her thoughts. He had pulled out supplies to make dinner, moving around the small kitchen area with practiced efficiency. "I meant what I said. No one is taking you back there. What if they come for me? Then they will learn why sensible people do not come up this far into the mountains uninvited." There was steel in his voice, a promise of violence held in check but ready to be unleashed if necessary. "I have defended this place before, and I will do it again if I have to." Natalie believed him. There was something in the way he carried himself, the confidence of a man who knew exactly how dangerous he was and had made peace with it. That told her he was not making empty threats. It should have been frightening, but instead she felt that same sense of safety that had been growing since the moment he broke her chains. Dinner was simple but filling. Venison stew made from meat Nathan had smoked earlier in the season, and vegetables he had stored in the root cellar. They ate in comfortable silence, and when Natalie tried to help clean up afterward, he waved her toward the bed. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow you can start pulling your weight if you insist, but tonight you need to let your body heal." She was too tired to argue. She crawled into the bed, still wearing Nathan's oversized jacket because it felt like armor against the world, and burrowed under the quilts. The bed smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else, something distinctly masculine that she realized must be Nathan himself. It should have been strange, sleeping in a man's bed while he was just feet away, but instead it was comforting in a way she could not quite explain. As she drifted off to sleep, she heard Nathan moving around the cabin, banking the fire and climbing the ladder to the loft. The last thing she registered was the sound of him settling in above her, and the knowledge that for the first time in 2 years, she was truly safe. Natalie woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows in golden shafts that painted everything in warm hues. For a disorienting moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her chest. Then memory returned in a rush, and with it came a relief so profound it made her dizzy. She sat up carefully, testing her body's limits. She was sore everywhere, muscles protesting from 3 days of abuse followed by 3 days on horseback, but it was a manageable pain. Her wrists still ached where the chains had cut into them, but when she unwrapped the bandages to check, the wounds looked better, less angry and starting to scab over. "Good morning," Nathan called from the kitchen area, not turning from where he was working at the stove. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Natalie admitted, climbing out of bed and finger-combing her hair into something resembling order. She must look a fright, she thought. Days without a proper bath and wearing clothes that were little more than rags. But Nathan had not looked at her with anything but respect since the moment they met. "There is fresh water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," he said, gesturing to the small table that held a basin and clean towels. "And I will dig out some clothes that might fit you better than what you are wearing. They were my sister's from when she visited 2 years back. She left them here in case she came again." The kindness of it made Natalie's throat tight. "You do not have to do that." "I want to," Nathan said simply and began plating food. "Come eat. We have work to do today if you are feeling up to it." They ate breakfast together, and Nathan outlined his plans for the day. Firewood needed to be split and stacked for winter. The last of the garden needed to be harvested and stored. The horse needed tending, and there were repairs to be made to the barn roof before the heavy snows came. It was the routine work of survival in the mountains, and he delivered it all in that same matter-of-fact tone, as though her presence there was the most natural thing in the world. "I can help," Natalie said. "I am not afraid of hard work." "I figured as much," Nathan said with a small smile. "But we are taking it slow today. Your body needs time to recover fully." After breakfast, Nathan showed her around the property, pointing out the root cellar dug into the hillside, the smokehouse where he preserved meat for winter, the garden plot that had clearly been well tended through the summer. There was a small chicken coop behind the cabin, and Natalie laughed with delight at the half-dozen hens that came running when Nathan scattered feed. "I did not take you for a chicken farmer," she teased, and was rewarded with that rare smile that softened his weathered face. "A man gets tired of hunting and jerky," he said. "Fresh eggs make a difference when you are snowed in for weeks at a time." He set her to harvesting the last of the root vegetables while he worked on splitting wood, and Natalie found herself falling into the rhythm of the work with unexpected ease. There was something deeply satisfying about the physical labor, the feel of earth under her hands and the growing pile of turnips and potatoes and carrots beside her. It was work on her own terms, not coerced or demanded, and that made all the difference. Throughout the morning, she found her gaze drifting to Nathan, watching the play of muscles in his back and arms as he swung the axe, the smooth efficiency of his movements. He had tied his hair back with a leather cord, and in the bright sunlight, she could see threads of silver mixed with the dark brown. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cool October air, and when he paused to drink from the water bucket, she watched his throat work and felt that flutter in her stomach again. This was dangerous territory. She had known this man for less than a week, and already she was feeling things she had no right to feel. But knowing something was dangerous did not make it any less real. Around midday, they broke for lunch, simple fare of bread and cheese and cold meat. They sat on the porch, looking out over the lake, and Nathan asked about her life before Jacob Thornton. Natalie told him about her father, a good man who had worked himself to death trying to provide for his family. She told him about helping her mother with sewing and cooking, about learning to read from the teacher who came through Hawthorne once a week. She told him about dreams of maybe becoming a teacher herself someday, though that had seemed impossible even before her mother died. "It is not impossible," Nathan said quietly. "If that is what you want, there are ways to make it happen. The Shoshone camp has children who could use a teacher and they respect learning. Or you could head to one of the bigger towns come spring, find a school that needs help." "I will think about it," Natalie said. But in truth, the idea of leaving this mountain, leaving Nathan, already made her chest ache in a way she did not want to examine too closely. They worked through the afternoon, falling into an easy partnership that felt like they had been doing this for years, rather than hours. Nathan was patient when she did not know how to do something, showing her the proper way to stack firewood for maximum drying, and how to identify which vegetables needed to be used first versus which would keep in the root cellar through winter. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nathan started a fire in the outdoor fire pit and announced they were having fresh trout for dinner. Natalie watched as he headed down to the lake with a fishing line, his movements sure and practiced, and found herself smiling for no reason at all. That night after dinner, they sat by the fire and Nathan asked if she wanted to hear stories from his time in the mountains. She did, desperately, and so he told her about tracking a cougar that had been harassing the Shoshone camp, about surviving a blizzard that lasted 5 days and buried the cabin under 10 feet of snow, about the time he had stumbled onto a mother bear and her cubs and had to back away slowly for half an hour before she decided he was not a threat. In return, she told him stories her father had told her as a child, tales of his own father coming west in a covered wagon, of crossing the plains and seeing the mountains for the first time. She told him about her mother's garden and her voice when she sang while she worked, about Sunday mornings at the little church in Hawthorne before Jacob Thornton had forbidden her to attend. By the time they finally headed inside, Natalie felt like she had known Nathan Turner her entire life, and the feeling should have been terrifying but instead was just warm and right. The days fell into a pattern after that. They worked together during the daylight hours, preparing the cabin and property for winter, and talked during the evenings by the fire. Natalie learned to chop wood, to preserve meat in the smokehouse, to identify the tracks of different animals in the dirt around the cabin. Nathan was a patient teacher, never condescending or impatient when she struggled with something new. Her wrists healed slowly, the raw wounds scabbing over and then fading to pink scars that Nathan told her would be less noticeable with time. She grew stronger too, the hollow look fading from her face as regular meals and honest work rebuilt her body. She filled out the borrowed clothes better now, her cheeks regaining color and her arms developing lean muscle from the physical labor. And every day, she fell a little more in love with Nathan Turner. It was in the small things. The way he always poured her coffee first in the morning. The way he positioned himself between her and any potential danger, whether it was a snake in the garden or a storm rolling in. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, his full attention on her as though her words mattered more than anything else in the world. She caught him watching her sometimes, when he thought she was not looking, and the expression in his storm-gray eyes made her breath catch. There was hunger there, carefully banked but unmistakable, and something softer that she almost thought might be tenderness. But he never acted on it, never made any move to close the distance between them, and she was not brave enough to do it herself. Not yet. 3 weeks after arriving at the cabin, the first real snow came. Natalie woke to a world transformed, everything draped in white and silence so complete it felt like they were the only two people left in existence. She stood on the porch in one of Nathan's shirts and a borrowed coat, breathing in the cold, clean air and feeling something shift inside her chest. This was home. Not the cabin, though she had come to love it, but this place, this mountain, this life. And if she was being honest with herself, this man, Nathan, came up behind her close enough that she could feel his warmth but not quite touching. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said quietly. "Yes," she whispered and turned to look at him. "Nathan, I need to tell you something." He met her gaze, and she saw wariness there, as though he was bracing himself for her to say she was leaving. "All right. I do not want to leave when spring comes," she said in a rush. "I know I said I would stay through the winter and then decide, but I have decided. I want to stay here. With you, if you will have me." The expression that crossed his face was so raw, so openly hopeful that it stole her breath. "Natalie," he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer. "I have wanted to ask you to stay since the day I brought you here, but I did not want you to feel obligated or trapped. You have been through so much, and you deserve the chance to choose your own path." "I am choosing," she said and stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I am choosing this. I am choosing you." For a long moment, Nathan just stared at her, and she could see the war playing out in his eyes, the battle between what he wanted and what he thought was right. Then something broke, and he reached out to cup her face in his large, calloused hands with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "Are you sure?" he asked hoarsely. "Because once I allow myself to want this, to want you, I do not know if I can let you go." "Then do not let me go," Natalie said, and rose up on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss started gentle, tentative, as though they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Nathan made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, and the gentleness gave way to something deeper, more urgent. His arms came around her, holding her against the solid wall of his chest, and Natalie melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she poured 2 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day I found you," he admitted roughly. "But you were hurt and scared, and I did not want to be just another man taking what he wanted." "You could never be that," Natalie said fiercely. "You saved me, Nathan, in every way a person can be saved, and somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." His arms tightened around her convulsively. "I love you too," he said, the words raw and honest. "I think I have from the moment I saw you chained to that plow, so brave and defiant even when you had every reason to give up. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Natalie Carson, and I would count myself the luckiest man alive if you would stay with me." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes to all of it. Yes." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it, and when he finally pulled back, there was a smile on his face that transformed him completely. "We should go inside," he said, "before we freeze to death out here." They went inside hand in hand, and Nathan built up the fire while Natalie made coffee with shaking hands, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. She had taken control of her own life, had chosen her own path, and it led here, to this cabin in the mountains with this man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in existence. They spent the day close together, finding excuses to touch, to be near each other. The physical work still needed to be done, but now there was a new awareness between them, a promise of more to come that made every glance, every accidental brush of hands, feel charged with electricity. That evening after dinner, Nathan pulled her down to sit with him in front of the fire. She curled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, and his arm came around her as naturally as breathing. "Tell me about your dreams," he said quietly. "What you want out of life." Natalie thought about it, really thought about it, maybe for the first time since her mother died. "I want this," she said finally. "A home, a partner who respects me, the freedom to make my own choices. I want to wake up every morning without fear. I want to teach maybe if the opportunity comes. I want children someday if we are blessed with them. But mostly I just want to be happy, and I think I can be that here with you." "I want all of that too," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never thought I would want to share this life with anyone. I came up here to be alone, to escape the weight of what I had seen and done. But now that you are here, I cannot imagine going back to that loneliness." They sat in silence for a while, just holding each other and watching the flames dance. Finally, Nathan spoke again. "There is something I need to tell you about what I did during the war." Natalie turned to look at him, sensing the weight behind his words. "You do not have to. I want you to know," he said. "I want there to be honesty between us, even when it is hard." He took a deep breath. "I was a sniper for the Union Army. They gave me that job because I was a good shot, and because I could make the hard calls when they needed to be made. I killed a lot of men, Natalie, more than I can count, and most of them never saw me coming." He paused, and she could see the old pain in his eyes, the guilt that he carried like a physical weight. "When the war ended, I could not go back to being the man I was before. I had blood on my hands, and it did not matter that I had been following orders or that I believed in the cause. Dead is dead, and I was the one who made them that way. So I came out here to a place where the only life and death decisions I make are about whether to shoot a deer for meat or let it pass." Natalie reached up and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "You did what you had to do to survive a terrible war," she said firmly. "That does not make you a bad man, and the fact that it still weighs on you tells me everything I need to know about your character. How can you be so sure?" He asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice that made her heart ache. "Because you broke chains to free a stranger," she said. "Because you have treated me with nothing but kindness and respect. Because you are a good man, Nathan Turner, whether you believe it or not. And I am not going anywhere." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and she understood that he was seeking absolution, trying to prove to himself that he was worthy of the grace she was offering. She gave it freely, pouring all her love and acceptance into the kiss, and when they finally broke apart, she could see that some of the shadows had lifted from his eyes. They made a plan that night, sitting tangled together on the floor in front of the fire. They would marry in the spring, Nathan said, if she would have him. They would ride down to the Shoshone camp and ask the tribal elder to perform the ceremony, since neither of them had any desire to involve the law or the church in Hawthorne. They would build this life together, one day at a time, and whatever came, they would face it side by side. Natalie agreed to all of it, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Winter settled over the mountains with a vengeance, burying the cabin under feet of snow and turning the world into a pristine white wilderness. But inside, warmed by the fire and Nathan's presence, Natalie had never been happier. They fell into an easy domesticity, sharing the work of survival and the quiet joy of each other's company. Nathan taught her to shoot, setting up targets in the clearing and patiently correcting her form until she could hit a tin can at 50 paces. He taught her to read tracks in the snow, to identify the difference between deer and elk, between a lone wolf and a hunting pack. He taught her the Shoshone words he knew, the proper way to cure hides, how to make soap from ashes and fat. In return, Natalie brought warmth and life to the cabin that had been missing in all the years Nathan had lived alone. She sang while she worked, her voice sweet and clear, songs her mother had taught her and songs she made up on the spot. She cooked meals that were more than just fuel, putting care and creativity into every dish. She listened to his stories and shared her own, and slowly, carefully, they built a foundation of trust and love that grew stronger with every passing day. The physical side of their relationship developed slowly, respectfully. Nathan seemed determined to do things properly, to court her even in the isolation of the mountains, and Natalie found it endearing even as she sometimes wanted to grab him and demand he stop being so honorable. But she understood the reason behind it. He was giving her time, giving her control, making sure she knew that every step forward was her choice. It was 3 months after that first kiss, in the deep cold of January, that Natalie finally climbed the ladder to the loft where Nathan slept. He was lying on his back, hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling when she emerged from the ladder. His eyes widened when he saw her, but he did not send her away. "Natalie," he said carefully, "what are you doing up here?" "I am tired of sleeping alone," she said simply, and crossed to his bedroll. "I am tired of being proper and patient. I love you, Nathan Turner, and I want to be your wife in every way that matters. So unless you are going to tell me no, I am staying here tonight." For a long moment he just looked at her and she could see the war playing out on his face. Then he sat up and reached for her, pulling her down beside him. "I could never tell you no," he said roughly. "Not about this, not about anything." He kissed her then, and it was different from the kisses they had shared before, deeper and more urgent, a promise of what was to come. His hands were careful on her body, always giving her the chance to pull away, but she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, with a fierceness that surprised her. They made love slowly, tenderly, Nathan worshiping her body with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and gentle, checking in with her constantly to make sure she was all right, and when it was over, he held her close and whispered words of love against her hair. Natalie fell asleep in his arms, feeling safe and cherished and finally, truly free. After that night, they shared the loft, and the cabin felt even more like home. They were lovers and partners, facing each day together, and Natalie could not imagine her life any other way. February brought a fierce blizzard that trapped them inside for 5 days straight. They passed the time talking and reading from Nathan's small collection of books, making love and planning for the future. Natalie taught him a card game her father had loved, and Nathan showed her how to carve small figures from wood, a skill left over from his carpentry days. On the 6th day, when the storm finally broke, they dug their way out into a world of blinding white and cold so sharp it hurt to breathe. But the sky was clear and blue, and Natalie laughed with pure joy at being outside again, spinning in the snow like a child. Nathan watched her with such love in his eyes that it stole her breath when she caught sight of it. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Not in the spring. Now, today." "We cannot get to the Shoshone camp in this snow," Natalie pointed out, but her heart was racing. "Then we will marry ourselves," Nathan said. "Right here, right now. Just you and me and God and these mountains as witnesses. I do not need a ceremony or a piece of paper to know you are my wife, Natalie. You already are in every way that matters." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, let us do that." They stood in the clearing in front of the cabin, knee-deep in snow, and spoke their vows to each other. There was no preacher, No guests, no formal words, just two people who had found each other in the darkest moments and chosen to build a life together. "I promise to love you," Nathan said, his deep voice carrying in the crisp air. "To protect you and provide for you, to respect your choices and support your dreams. I promise to be your partner and your friend, to stand beside you through whatever comes. You are my wife, Natalie Carson, from this day until my last day." "I promise to love you," Natalie said, her voice trembling with emotion. "To be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys. I promise to be honest with you, to choose you every day, to build this life with you no matter what challenges we face. You are my husband, Nathan Turner, from this day until forever." They kissed then, sealing their vows, and when they pulled apart, Natalie was crying and laughing at the same time. Nathan picked her up and spun her around, both of them grinning like fools, and in that moment, Natalie knew that everything she had endured, all the pain and fear and darkness, had been worth it to arrive here at this place with this man. They celebrated their wedding by making love in front of the fire, slow and sweet, and then cooking a feast from their winter stores. That night, wrapped in each other's arms in the loft, Natalie whispered, "I never thought I could be this happy. I did not know it was possible." "Neither did I," Nathan admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay this happy. That is my promise to you." The rest of the winter passed in a blur of contentment. They were snowed in more often than not, but neither of them minded. They had each other, and that was enough. Nathan continued to teach Natalie the skills she needed to survive in the mountains, and she soaked up the knowledge eagerly, determined to be a true partner rather than a burden. In March, the snow began to melt, revealing the world beneath in stages. The lake thawed, the creek began to run, and the first brave birds returned from their southern migration. Nathan and Natalie emerged from the cabin like bears from hibernation, blinking in the bright spring sunshine and eager to assess what work needed to be done. They spent April repairing the damage from winter and preparing the garden for planting. Nathan went hunting and returned with a deer, which they butchered together, Natalie learning the process with typical determination despite the gore involved. She was tougher than she had been when she arrived, hardened by months of mountain living, and Nathan looked at her with pride that made her stand taller. In May, they rode down to the Shoshone camp to officially announce their marriage and to trade some of Nathan's furs for supplies they needed. The tribe welcomed them warmly, particularly an elder woman named Wayne who had known Nathan for years. She examined Natalie with keen eyes and then nodded approvingly. "This one has a strong spirit," she said in heavily accented English. "She will give you strong children and keep you from becoming too much of a bear in your cave." Nathan laughed at that, and Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest at the easy acceptance. They spent 3 days with the tribe, and Natalie found herself drawn to the children, teaching them simple games and helping with chores. Wayne noticed and pulled her aside. "You would be good teacher," the old woman said. "Children need to learn both ways, the old and the new. You come back in fall, maybe stay few weeks. Teach our children, learn our ways." Natalie looked at Nathan, who nodded encouragingly. "I would like that," she said. "Thank you." They returned to the cabin with full packs and fuller hearts, settling back into their mountain life with renewed purpose. Natalie started planning lessons for the fall, and Nathan began work on expanding the cabin, building an additional room that could serve as both a workspace and, eventually, a nursery. In late June, Natalie woke feeling queasy and immediately knew. She spent the morning being quietly ill while Nathan hovered, worried, and finally she told him. "I am with child," she said, and watched his face transform with wonder and joy and a hint of fear. "Are you certain?" he asked, and when she nodded, he swept her up in his arms, being careful not to jostle her too much. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Natalie asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Nathan said, and kissed her softly. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a purpose, a future. And now this. I do not have words for how much I love you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Natalie continued to work, though Nathan insisted she take it easier, and they fell into new routines designed to protect both her and the baby. Nathan was almost comically protective, hovering whenever she did anything remotely strenuous, and Natalie loved him for it even when she wanted to tell him to back off. In August, they made another trip down to the Shoshone camp, this time to ask Wayne to attend the birth when the time came. The old woman agreed readily, pleased to be asked, and gave Natalie herbs to help with the nausea and instructions on what to expect. "You will do well," she said firmly. "You are strong and your man is devoted. These are the things that matter." September brought Natalie to the Shoshone camp to begin teaching as she had promised. Nathan came with her, and they set up a temporary shelter on the edge of the camp. For 3 weeks, Natalie taught the children basic reading and arithmetic, while also learning about the tribe's ways, their stories and customs and deep connection to the land. It was fulfilling in a way she had not expected, and she returned to the cabin glowing with accomplishment and already planning for the next session. October arrived, and with it came the reminder that a year had passed since Nathan had found her chained to that plow. They marked the anniversary quietly, sitting together on the porch and looking out over the lake as the aspens turned gold around them. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if I had not come along that day?" Nathan asked. "No," Natalie said firmly. "Because that version of my life does not exist. You did come along. You saved me, and everything after that has been a gift." "I was the one who was saved," Nathan said quietly. "I was just existing up here, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live again, not just survive." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the sun set behind the mountains. A year ago, Natalie had been broken and afraid, convinced her life was over. Now she was a wife, soon to be a mother, living a life she had chosen with a man she loved beyond measure. The scars on her wrists had faded to thin silver lines, and she wore them without shame. They were a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. As winter approached again, they prepared with the confidence of experience. The cabin was well stocked, the firewood plentiful, the root cellar full. Nathan had traded for extra supplies with the baby in mind, including soft fabrics for swaddling and a cradle he had commissioned from a Shoshone craftsman. The first snow came in early November, and Natalie watched it fall with a sense of peace. She was 7 months along now, her belly round and prominent, and the baby kicked vigorously enough that Nathan could feel it when he placed his hand on her stomach. He talked to the baby constantly, telling stories and making promises, and Natalie fell in love with him all over again, watching him prepare to be a father. December was cold and quiet, the world hushed under deep snow. They spent most of their time inside, and Nathan read aloud to her while she worked on knitting small clothes for the baby. They debated names, settling on Elijah if it was a boy and Sarah if it was a girl, both family names that honored their pasts while looking toward their future. On a frigid night in mid-January, Natalie woke to the first pains of labor. Nathan, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks now, was immediately alert. "Is it time?" he asked, and she nodded, breathing through the contraction. They had planned for this. Nathan had set aside supplies and boiled water and prepared everything they would need. But it was the middle of winter, and there was no way to get to Waianae in time. They would face this alone, and while there was fear in that, there was also a strange rightness. They had faced everything else together. They would face this too. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Nathan stayed with her the entire time, letting her squeeze his hands until his knuckles turned white, wiping her face with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement. When the pain grew too intense, he held her and whispered that she was strong, that she could do this, that he loved her more than anything in the world. Just before dusk, as the winter sun was setting behind the mountains, their son was born. Nathan caught him with steady hands and cut the cord with his knife, then wrapped him in the soft cloths they had prepared and placed him in Natalie's arms. "He is perfect," Natalie whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the tiny, squalling bundle. "Look what we made, Nathan." Nathan was crying too, unashamed, as he knelt beside the bed and touched his son's impossibly small hand with one large finger. "Hello, Elijah," he said roughly. "Welcome to the world, little man. Your mama and I are going to love you so much." The days after the birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Elijah was healthy and strong-lunged, and he quickly fell into a routine of eating and sleeping that left his parents stumbling around in a daze. But neither of them complained. This was the family they had built together, and every moment, even the difficult ones, was precious. When the snow melted enough for travel, they made the trip down to the Shoshone camp to introduce Elijah to Waianae and the rest of the tribe. The old woman held the baby and pronounced him strong and healthy, then chided them for not sending for her. "Next time, you send word," she said firmly. "No matter the weather. I have delivered many babies in worse conditions than snow." "Next time," Natalie promised, and felt Nathan's hand tighten around hers at the implication that there would be a next time, more children to fill their cabin with noise and life. The years that followed were full and rich. Elijah grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 2, his sister Sarah was born, this time with Waianae in attendance, and 2 years after that came Daniel, completing their family. Natalie continued to teach at the Shoshone camp twice a year, taking the children with her as they grew old enough to travel. Nathan built additions onto the cabin to accommodate their growing family, and taught his sons to hunt and track and survive in the mountains, while Sarah learned right alongside them, just as capable as her brothers. They rarely went to Hawthorne, having no need for anything the town could provide, but news occasionally filtered up through trappers and traders. Jacob Thornton had died 3 years after Natalie left, shot in a dispute over a card game. The banker's son had married someone else and subsequently been arrested for embezzlement. The house, where Natalie had been so miserable, had burned down, and no one had bothered to rebuild. Natalie felt nothing when she heard these things. That life was so far removed from her current reality that it might as well have belonged to a different person. She had no interest in revenge or vindication. She had something far better, a life she loved, built with her own hands and heart. On a warm spring evening when Elijah was 12, Sarah 10, and Daniel 8, the family sat around the fire pit outside the cabin. The children were roasting marshmallows, a treat Nathan had brought back from his last trading trip, and debating who had seen the biggest trout in the lake that morning. Nathan sat with his arm around Natalie, and she leaned into his solid warmth, watching their children with a contentment that still sometimes surprised her with its depth. "Do you ever regret staying?" Nathan asked quietly, a question he asked every few years as though he needed reassurance. "Never," Natalie said firmly and turned to kiss him softly. "You gave me everything, Nathan, Freedom, love, family, purpose. How could I ever regret that? I was the one who was given everything, Nathan said, echoing the conversation they had first had years ago. You walked with me, and you transformed my life into something I never thought I could have. We transformed each other, Natalie corrected, and it was true. They had both been broken in their own ways when they met, but together they had built something whole and beautiful and lasting. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Natalie thought back to that rain-soaked day when a mountain man had broken her chains and offered her a simple choice. Walk with me. She had said yes, and that decision had led to this. A life overflowing with love and laughter, children who knew nothing of chains or cruelty, a partnership built on mutual respect and deep, abiding love. The scars on her wrists were barely visible now, faded to almost nothing by time and healing. But Natalie touched them sometimes, remembering. Not because she wanted to dwell on the pain, but because those scars were part of her story, a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had survived. She was no longer the terrified girl chained to a plow in the rain. She was Natalie Turner, wife and mother and teacher, a woman who had chosen her own path and built a life beyond anything she had dared to dream. And every day, when she woke up beside Nathan in their cabin in the mountains, she counted herself the luckiest woman alive. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the gradual growth of their children. Elijah grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence and gentle strength. Sarah developed her mother's fierce determination, and her father's skill with a rifle, declaring early on that she had no intention of being confined by anyone's expectations of what a girl should or should not do. Daniel was the dreamer of the family, always asking questions about the wider world and drawing pictures of places he had never seen. Nathan and Natalie watched their children grow with pride and occasional trepidation, knowing that eventually they would need to let them forge their own paths. But for now, they were all together, a family unit bound by love and shared experience. When Elijah turned 16, he announced that he wanted to travel east for a year, to see the cities and learn about the world beyond the mountains. It was a hard conversation, but Nathan and Natalie ultimately supported his decision, understanding the need to find his own way. They sent him off with their blessing and enough money to sustain him, and spent the year worrying and trying not to show it. He returned 12 months later, lean and travel-worn but with a new maturity in his eyes. I needed to see it, he told them over dinner on his first night back. But this is home, this is where I belong. Relief washed through both parents, though they tried to hide it. Their family was whole again. Sarah declared at 14 that she wanted to train as a healer with Wayne, who was now ancient but still sharp as ever. She spent months at a time at the Shoshone camp, learning the old ways of medicine and developing a skill that would serve her well throughout her life. Daniel, true to his dreamer nature, left at 18 to attend university back east, supported by money Nathan had saved over years of trading. He wrote long letters home describing his studies and the wonders of Boston. And while they missed him terribly, Nathan and Natalie were proud beyond words that their son had the opportunity to pursue his passion for learning. As their children grew and began their own lives, Nathan and Natalie found themselves returning to the easy partnership they had established in those early years. They were older now, Nathan's hair more silver than brown and Natalie's face lined with the marks of sun and laughter. But the love between them had only deepened with time. On their 20th anniversary, Nathan took Natalie back to the clearing where they had married themselves in the snow. It was summer now, and wildflowers bloomed in riotous color all around them. 20 years, he said, pulling her close, and I love you more now than I did on that day. That is because I am much less of a mess than I was then, Natalie teased, but she was crying happy tears as she kissed him. You have never been a mess, Nathan said seriously. You have always been the strongest person I know, from the moment I found you chained but unbowed. You were magnificent then, and you are magnificent now. They renewed their vows there in the clearing, just the two of them as it had been the first time, and Natalie felt the same rush of love and certainty she had felt 2 decades earlier. This was her person, her partner, her home. As they grew older, they took on new roles in the community. Nathan became a respected elder among the Shoshone, called upon to help mediate disputes and offer counsel. Natalie's teaching expanded to include not just children but anyone who wanted to learn, and she became known throughout the region as someone who could bridge the gap between the old ways and the new. Their cabin became a gathering place, a refuge for those in need just as it had once been a refuge for Natalie. They took in a young woman fleeing an abusive husband, sheltering her until she could get on her feet. They helped a family of homesteaders who had arrived unprepared for mountain winters, teaching them the skills they needed to survive. They built a life that was about more than just themselves, about community and compassion, and paying forward the grace that had been shown to them. Elijah married at 22, choosing a Shoshone woman named Ayanna, who was Sarah's best friend and the daughter of one of the tribal leaders. They built a cabin not far from Nathan and Natalie's, and soon grandchildren began arriving. Sarah never married, declaring herself perfectly content with her healing work and her independence, though she had no shortage of suitors. Daniel returned from Boston with a degree and a wife, a city woman who adapted to mountain life with surprising ease, and they settled in one of the growing towns in the valley, where Daniel opened a school. Nathan and Natalie became grandparents 6 times over, their cabin frequently full of small bodies and loud voices. They loved every chaotic minute of it, marveling at the family that had grown from 2 broken people who had found each other in the rain. On a quiet evening in late summer, when they were both in their 60s, Nathan and Natalie sat on their porch watching the sunset just as they had done thousands of times before. Their bodies were slower now, marked by age and hard living, but their love had never wavered. "Do you remember the day I found you?" Nathan asked, and Natalie smiled because of course she did. She remembered every detail as though it had been yesterday. "You broke my chains and told me to walk with you," she said softly, "and I have been walking with you ever since." "Best decision I ever made," Nathan said and pulled her close. "You have given me a life I never dreamed possible. Children, grandchildren, a home that is more than just 4 walls, purpose and joy and love, so much love." "You gave me all of that too," Natalie said. "You gave me freedom when I had none. You gave me respect when I had been treated like property. You loved me when I had forgotten how to love myself. You saved my life, Nathan Turner, and then you built a life with me that was worth saving." They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The lake reflected the colors perfectly, a mirror of beauty that took Natalie's breath away even after all these years. She thought about the girl she had been, chained in the mud and rain, and marveled at the distance she had traveled. She had been right, all those years ago, to say yes when Nathan asked her to walk with him. That single decision had changed the course of her entire life, had led to love and family, and a sense of belonging she had never thought to find. She had chosen freedom, and in choosing it, she had found everything else. As night fell and the stars began to emerge overhead, Nathan helped Natalie to her feet and they went inside their cabin, the home they had built together over decades of love and partnership. Their children were grown, their grandchildren thriving, their legacy secure. They had lived a good life, a full life, and it was not over yet. There were still mornings to wake up together, still meals to share and stories to tell. There were still grandchildren to spoil and seasons to witness and moments of quiet joy to savor. There was still love, deep and abiding and unshakable, the foundation on which everything else had been built. And when the time came years later for their story to end, they would face that together too, just as they had faced everything else. But that time was not yet. For now, there was simply this: two people who had found each other in the darkest of moments and had chosen to build a life illuminated by love. Nathan and Natalie Turner lived many more good years in their mountain cabin, surrounded by family and community, their love a beacon that had guided them both through storm and sunshine. And when people asked Natalie, as they sometimes did, how she had survived such hardship and built such a beautiful life, her answer was always the same. "A mountain man broke my chains and asked me to walk with him," she would say with a smile. "And I said yes. That was the beginning of everything." The end came peacefully for both of them, in their 80s, within months of each other, as though neither could bear to be without the other for long. They died in their sleep in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed their love story from beginning to end. Their children and grandchildren gathered to mourn and to celebrate, sharing stories of two remarkable people who had found each other against all odds and had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through the years as a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other and refused to let go. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the Ruby Mountains and rain lashed the windows, people swore they could still feel the presence of Nathan and Natalie Turner, two souls bound together by love and freedom, and the simple choice to walk together through whatever came. Their story became legend in the region, told around fires and passed down through families, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, salvation could come from the most unexpected places. A reminder that love, when it was real and true and built on respect and partnership, could overcome anything. A reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person to break your chains and offer their hand, and the courage to say yes and walk with them into an unknown future. And for Natalie Carson Turner, who had once been chained to a plow in the rain with no hope of escape, that yes had led to a lifetime of love, freedom, and joy beyond her wildest dreams. It had led to Nathan, to their children and grandchildren, to a home in the mountains and a community that valued her. It had led to a life where she was respected and cherished, where she made her own choices and walked her own path. It had led to everything. And in the end, as she took her last breath with Nathan's hand in hers even in death, Natalie knew she had lived exactly the life she was meant to live. She had been saved, yes, but she had also saved herself, choosing freedom and love and partnership over resignation and despair. The mountain man had broken her chains, but she was the one who had chosen to walk with him, and that choice had made all the difference. Their love story became a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the transformative nature of love freely given and gratefully received. It reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how dark the present moment, there was always hope for a better future. All you had to do was say yes when someone offered their hand and asked you to walk with them. And if you were very lucky, that walk would lead to love, to home, to a life beyond your wildest dreams. For Nathan and Natalie Turner, it had led to all of that and more. It had led to forever.